Let's go to the phones, 800-636-1067. We were talking about Brandon McManus being released by the Commanders just a few days after they said they'd be looking into, and I'm paraphrasing, but reserving judgment until they found out more about what happened on the plane with allegations against their kicker. He's no longer their kicker. They have cut him. Carl is in Calvert on G&D. What's up, Carl? Thanks for the call.
How you guys doing on the day that Brandon McManus got released day?
Day.
Guys, if you mentioned it, I'm sorry for repeating the point, but the absolute stench of sexual assault that Dan Snyder, other lower employees like Larry Michael, the stench of sexual assault that they left on this franchise, just like, decades and decades ago, the stench of racism that previous owners left on this franchise. I believe Adam Harris wants to have almost a zero tolerance. As you guys mentioned, if you're the star quarterback, you're obviously going to have a little bit of leeway. But I think he wants to have as close to a zero tolerance policy after the stench of what Dan Snyder left on that franchise.
So we didn't really bring that up in the first segment. Probably should have. It did come up quite a bit late last week when we discussed these allegations.
It's hard to ignore the backdrop, right?
It's pertinent. They came in here. The only reason Josh Harris owns the team is because of a toxic workplace and a horrendous culture and mistreatment of employees, mostly female employees. And without those things, I think Dan Snyder probably still owns this team. So you can't take over in that image and kind of with that situation and not take this all very seriously. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't, right? They absolutely have to. But I agree with him completely. If this was a different organization where you didn't have the Washington Post story, you didn't have the allegations about Dan Snyder, you weren't here to quote unquote clean up the culture, that we have not talked in a lot of other markets as a football show and a radio show for hours and hours and hours about how female employees have been treated and allegations against your owner, then maybe you treat this differently. But I think there is this zero tolerance where maybe here more than in other places, the allegation is enough. Like, let's not have these types of allegations come our way. We've got to go X amount of months, X amount of years with people viewing us through a different light so that we can get out of the past and the shadows of what was.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good comp, and there isn't one because, again, it's very touchy. But this is the first thing I thought of. The league goes, all right, we're going to allow, this is the NFL, we're going to allow gambling, but nobody can bet on any kind of games with having to do with football. Nobody. The first guy that did it or was alleged to have done it, Calvin Ridley, book's going to get thrown at you, right? And again, it's not the same. It's not apples to apples. I understand that. But the first person that's got the stench of this or the allegation thing hanging over his head, post Snyder, post all of this stuff, you're probably not going to get as much leeway or benefit of the doubt maybe as you deserve. And I don't know that that's fair. In fact, I'm sure it's not fair. But I think that maybe has something to do with it, honestly, with the backdrop.
You didn't want to be the first one fighting this fight. I think the way I said it last week, which was dumb, was there's never a good time for these allegations. It's about as bad as it gets, though.
Mm-hmm.
If you're McManus in a hypothetical where you're sitting there and you're innocent and you're saying, oh, come on, this is a misunderstanding, or I didn't do that, or this is not exactly how it went down. I think some of that matters less right now in the moment. And you know that. You're sitting there at home, you're talking to your agent or whoever, and they're saying, this is a team that just got through fighting all of these things. They're not going to be willing to go to the end of the marathon to defend you. And again, this isn't a hypothetical where we're talking from the perspective of his point of view, if he, in fact, and his attorney, Brett Galloway, are correct. By the way, I want to read the statement from his attorney.
Please.
Galloway put out after he was released, Brandon would like to thank the Washington Commanders for their opportunity to be a part of the organization. However, we reiterate that the allegations against Brandon are and remain absolutely false, and importantly, are contradicted by indisputable evidence and the accuser's own prior inconsistent statements and omissions. While we are disappointed with the team's decision to release Brandon before we had the opportunity to defend against these fabricated claims, we will aggressively defend and clear Brandon's full name and reputation through the legal process. We intend to defeat these claims, fully exonerate him, and look forward to seeing him back on the field where he belongs, end quote. Couple of new parts because his first statement didn't go into this detail,
Mhm.
but he says, like he did before, these claims are false. And then he goes on to say, contradicted by indisputable evidence and accusers' own prior inconsistent statements and omissions. Now, we don't know what that means because we haven't seen any of the documents that he has,
Right.
but I wonder what he's suggesting.
I mean, clearly, right? I mean, that stands out. The other part or the first statement is, we'll vigorously defend this. He's innocent, etc. The way a defense attorney would.
Pretty cookie cutter.
Yeah. The next layer or the next level up is they're not telling the truth. There's indisputable evidence as
Yeah,
such.
and now he's saying we've got evidence,
and
that
there's
Brandon's
inconsistencies.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's go to Brandon in Waldorf on G&D. How are you?
I'm great, you guys. Just want to make a quick comment. First of all, I agree with you guys. I mean, no one's going to stand for this more, especially not this organization. I find it, I find it kind of interesting that when the story first broke a week and a half ago, they announced it like this. Brandon McManus was accused of this, that, and the other, but this was his time previously in Jacksonville. Like, Washington definitely separated themselves from the very beginning. Also, side note, guys, you were talking about burnt ends. If you go to Costco, they have a brand called Kirkland that sells great burnt ends. You put your sauce on them, you stick them a few minutes later. Wow.
I've had them. They're amazing.
They're great.
They come in like that little, like a kit, for lack of a better term, but it's like a little tray with the white paper that slides off the top, right?
Yep.
They're so good, dude. Thank you for the call. Appreciate you. I don't remember the Commanders in a statement necessarily distancing themselves to that extent. I think to his point, though, they did say, in just talking about what happened, like while he was on the Jaguars, if that's what he's referencing, 1 year ago. I remember, though, a couple of even media members in town, like John Keim from ESPN, when he posted his story on this, he said NFL kicker Brandon McManus, which I found really interesting because he's a Commanders beat reporter and he plays for the Commanders. And maybe most people didn't think about that, but as someone who's had to write those stories or done those tweets in the past, you would say, generally, Commanders kicker Brandon McManus is being accused of. And he said NFL kicker Brandon McManus, which I just found interesting because it is a way, it's kind of a solid by him for the org, in a sense, to distance him from the team. And maybe his thought was he didn't do this when he was with the team. He did it as a Jaguar. The team didn't know it. They deserve to not be dragged into this. I don't know if he thought that much about it, but I did find that really interesting because you don't normally, like, if you're referring to Terry McLaurin,
catch. Yeah.
You don't say NFL wide receiver
who
Terry
currently
McLaurin.
plays for Washington. Yeah, you wouldn't do that.
Commanders receiver Terry McLaurin. And there were plenty of stories out there that said NFL kicker. If he's a free agent, you would refer to him that way. He's now a Commander.
It's a good catch. Yeah. They've like done everything they and rightfully so, obviously. Again, the point is you're trying to put up a wall or barrier or chasm, or whatever analogy you want to use, between you and the alleged thing. And they should in this case, most specifically, because it 100% didn't occur under their supervision. Not lost on me is the fact that this is part of a larger substantive problem, it sounds like, with Jacksonville and the team playing. By the way, it's not as if they were sitting there quietly, playing tiddlywinks or playing handheld video games or just, playing cards with each other. It sounds like there was a lot of tomfoolery and ballyhoo at a minimum going on. And Washington doesn't want to be associated with that. Understandable.
Let's go to Vince in Accokeek on G&D. How are you, Vince?
What's up, guys?
Hey, man.
So on the McManus thing, I could say, as much as I don't know you guys outside of the radio, that it's fair to say that you guys might be accused or falsely accused for eating too much at the barbecue. I doubt that you guys would ever be falsely accused of selling drugs. When it comes to this type of thing, legal defense, all that, I just feel like certain things, your name just shouldn't be associated with it. And once it is, get another gig somewhere else on another team. But you can't be here. Like, we've had too much of this. So good riddance. Hopefully he didn't do it. If he didn't, I hope he's vindicated. But
to be clear then, Vince, and we're in lockstep, just so you know, that if he did what is alleged, he should not only not play for Washington, but he shouldn't play in the league. And frankly, if he did what's alleged, that's crime. I'd like to see him actually prosecuted for that and arrested. And,
Mhm.
and I mean, that's a real thing, right? We agree on all
Right.
that. But what you
We
just
definitely
said
agree
to
on that.
me is the allegation should be enough to cut a player in general.
That's why I am with it. I
That's a
can say
dangerous
that
place to
nobody
be,
does.
don't you think? That's not saying
I
that
do
out
think
loud
it's a
doesn't make
dangerous
you
place to be.
uncomfortable that if anybody comes forward
No,
and claims you did something that you get cut?
not not at all. Not at all.
Mm.
It really doesn't, because the way I'm built and the way I'm set up, I'm not putting myself in certain places to be in certain situations. And there were a lot of other players on that on that plane, but Brandon McManus' name came up, and a lot of other players might have came up, but some other players did not. I'm gonna always be that other player that did not. My mom taught me, I don't care if all 30 kids in the classroom acting up, the teacher better say at least one kid was on point. And that's the way I come up. So it's certain things my name won't be associated with. Now, if you say, we call Vince eating too much cheesecake, he probably did that.
Vince may be guilty.
He loves his cheesecake, that Vince.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's just it's something that's just not where I am mentally.
Yeah.
I'm too much of a believer in due process.
Can I
that.
say that I like his point, actually?
Sure.
I just disagree with where his eventual decision on it, right? I think there's something to be said for, like, Danny, you've been really good in your career at not getting accused of anything crazy,
Mhm.
right? Like, my point is to just write in Sharpie, the allegation is enough for you to lose your job, for your life to be ruined. I'm not picking up that pen. If you want to, that's cool. I think every case, this is a crazy idea in 2024, I understand, should be investigated thoroughly, should be dug into. You can't really do a thorough investigation in a few days. Now, if they came across a video, if they came across evidence, if they called the Jags and they said, here's two players that were sitting in his row who will corroborate the story, good enough. That's an investigation, and it was pretty quick because it was easy.
Mhm.
But if you're asking me, do I agree or disagree with his premise, which is point blank, and I clarified with him, an allegation means that you put yourself in a bad spot, and that's enough for me to say he's gone. I'm just not going to go there.
Yeah, again, it's one example, and people could come up with 1,000 examples in the other direction. But here's the point, because we're talking about innocence. I keep saying the name. Matt Araiza was released immediately by the Buffalo Bills when a horrible accusation was thrown his way. The prosecutor in the case literally said after, the proceedings began, he didn't have a job for a couple of years. He wasn't there. Not only was he was present, as Vince was talking about, and something was going on, and he was adjacent or he was close by, but he may have been one of the good behaving guys he wasn't present for it.
Maybe he was raised well too, and he decided not to go to the party because he knew that bad stuff was going to happen.
He wasn't there. So, like, that sort of stuff puts the fear of God in me when it comes to this stuff. And to me, there's no other alternative than it's horrible on either end, right? If it happened, it's horrible. If it didn't happen, it's also horrible to a degree. Not as bad as if it did, but this is now a scarlet letter on Brandon McManus. And if he's innocent of it, that doesn't go away. The perception is still there, and he's now lost his gig because of it.
Well, he'll always be Brandon McManus, who was once accused of sexual assault,
Yeah.
That part, the moment there's an allegation, you never get that back. The difference, though, here is we're not talking about how will he be viewed forever. He's going to be viewed through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
Does the team cut you or does the team not cut you? Do you lose your job? Do you lose your career or do you not? And generally, there's been more of a threshold than the quick judgment of the masses that put you in a bucket with a lot of bad people because you're alleged to have done something pretty terrible. But we will get more and more information on this as it develops. For now, though, it really doesn't matter. The team has moved on. They have cut him. He's no longer the kicker. The allegations are awful. And if he did those things, then he's probably kicked for the final time in the league.